Shark and ray species that are globally protected are allegedly still being sold in Singapore wet markets, some without permits. Sources say this is in spite of enforcement and could undermine efforts to prevent overfishing of these species. And for more, Rachel Teng joins us in the studio to find out more. Now, Rachel, great to have you with us. Now, it's been about 2 months of investigative work that you've been doing. What have you found out so far?
Right, Angela. So maybe I should start off by giving you a bit of background of how I started to chase this story. You know, I was thinking of the words illegal wildlife trade. And when you think of these words, you would usually think ivory horns, pangolin scales, and this sort of things. And these receive the highest level of global protection and are not allowed to be traded at all. But there's actually another group that we seldom discuss. These are species that are not completely banned, but their trade is tightly regulated because their numbers are also falling. And many of them live underwater. So I found out that some of these threatened sharks still can be found in Singapore's wet markets and dishes, and even for a country such as ours that has such tight regulations. So let's take a closer look.
There are protected species that cannot be sold without a permit, but these photos given to me by sources show that black-tip reef sharks continue to turn up at some wet markets. The latest public records show that no permits were issued for meat sales for this particular shark and at least 4 other species. These include spot-tail sharks, bull sharks, black spot sharks, and spade-nose sharks. Most of these sightings, I am told, were at Tekka Market in the past 2 years. I've walked around this wet market a few times a week for about a month, and the fishmongers I spoke to here are well aware of the penalties of selling protected shark species without a permit. One seller I spoke to said they haven't sold such sharks in years. Another seller I spoke to said that they bring in these sharks through closed, opaque boxes and avoid displaying them openly. Some regulars in the area say prices for this group of sharks, also known as requiem sharks, are between $10 and $20. This is slightly more than legally allowed shark species that don't need a permit.
During the weekends particularly, that's when they bring out the most amount of fish to sell. I think I've seen requiem sharks being sold maybe about 50% to 70% of the time I visited Tekka Market. The most common species of requiem shark I've seen would be the black spot shark. The people I've seen buy them usually the elderly. And one particular visit I remember, I was there at 9 a.m. I saw like a few individuals of requiem sharks. And by the time I was done, it was around 10 a.m. already. And most of the sharks were already sold out by then. So they sell out quite fast.
Permits are needed because many shark and ray species are protected under a global treaty called CITES. They are overfished or on the brink of extinction. Some of these sharks could have come from further up the supply chain, according to marine life researchers. I tagged along one of their weekly surveys at the Jurong port, which they have been conducting for the past few years. And apparently, it isn't easy to spot illegal fishes.
So what you'll see down at the port is we have thousands of closed boxes that come in from Indonesia and Malaysia, and not all of these boxes are inspected. So it's very easy to put something into these boxes and it comes in and goes unnoticed.
These days, they say the fishes are chopped into smaller pieces, especially for certain types of rays. One buyer who frequents the fishery port says he's seen some.
Yeah, they will put inside the container. They'll ask you, do you want this or not? Do you want this? I know this is going to be extinct very soon. I know because due to our men slaughtering and this, they are very extinct very soon. But there's still people selling in the underground. What I mean by underground is just cut there, you put inside the container until you want.
And this makes identifying the species very challenging for authorities, and it's very difficult for them to tell, is this a protected species, is it an unprotected species?
Singapore's only fishery port now handles about 15% of the country's seafood imports. The rest may be brought in through direct bulk orders over closed land or air shipments. The National Parks Board says it's dealt with 7 cases of illegal shark and ray imports without permits in the last 5 years. Depending on the case, it's issued warning letters and fines.
Now, Rachel, as we heard from the researcher earlier, it can be very difficult to tell which species is illegal, especially when they're chopped up into small pieces. So what does all this mean for buyers?
Yeah, that's a great question. So if you look at this graphic here, in 2023, there were at least 50 species of sharks and rays that were given more global protections, which means that they need permits for trading. And the ones listed on the screen were the ones that you saw in my story earlier, requiem sharks. These are just some of them, and they're all species that are traded for their meat, their fins, their liver oil, and quite often focused in Asia. So since last December, even more species have been completely banned for commercial international trade. Countries can now also completely ban exports for wild-caught wedgefish and giant guitarfish. It's likely that even more species may be added in the coming years as welfare for marine species become more and more under the spotlight. And we've seen this happen in the past few years. So back to your question on what does this really mean? This means that as a buyer, number one, we may be more limited in the marine species that we can eat in the future. And number two, having so many on the list also means that many of us may not be able to identify what we're buying, whether it's illegal. So also remember earlier, like you said, how these allegedly illegal fish are chopped up. Some of the times, these are mixed in with commonly sold illegal species. And that means that it could turn up on our plates without us even knowing.
One researcher found that 27% of shark meat sold locally in supermarkets or grocers were protected species that likely didn't have permits. And with more species now protected, this number is up to 89%.
Even though the study was done in 2022, we expect the results to be similar even if we were to look at the different dried shark meat products now, because most of these products don't have a specific indication as to what species they are. They're just labeled generically as shark meat. So even if certain species are protected, you can't really control the trade unless you know exactly what species each product contains.
The only way to identify flesh that's cut up is a DNA test.
Visual species identification for marine commodities is very challenging. Another big challenge is how traceability tools have to be very robust. They have to cover all points of the supply chain and yet be feasible to implement by enforcement or regulatory authorities or by the industries themselves.
She says because marine species span vast ranges over international waters, it's harder to pinpoint their source, complicating enforcement.
Now, Rachel, given all these challenges, what are the authorities doing about this? Do you see any greater enforcement coming up?
So in terms of enforcement, NParks follows up on intel that they receive from other agencies and international partners such as the Interpol. And its frontline officers also use a homegrown AI-powered app called Fin Finder to visually identify fins of sharks and rays quickly and with high levels of accuracy on the ground. And when it comes to suspicious shipments, NParks may also conduct further checks. But if we're looking at chopped up meat, like you saw in the story, and not fins, then it may be harder, and it may only be the case where DNA testing really shows what species it is. And like that one of the experts also mentioned, technology may still have a long way to go when it comes to tracing marine species. But another thing that NParks has done is ramp up penalties in the last few years. So since 2022, under the Endangered Species Import and Export Act, illegally trading such protected species in Singapore without a permit carries fines of up to $500,000 and or 4 years in jail time. Now, these numbers go up to $1 million and 6 years for companies, 6 years of jail time. So, yeah.
Well, Rachel, we've been having quite a fascinating discussion so far. We're going to take a short pause for the moment and take a quick break, but we'll continue with that conversation in just a bit. Still ahead, we'll dig deeper into the expanding illegal trade as it goes online.